Welcome to the life you crave. Simple and sustainable weight loss for women who have better things to do than diet. I'm your host, Leah Pinelli. I help ambitious, badass women stop overeating, overworking, and overgiving to lose weight from a place of love. I'll help you simplify weight loss, end your overwhelm, and create the life you crave. If you like what you hear, please like and subscribe to this podcast. Let's get started.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Life You Crave podcast, recorded live right here in the currently named Food Freedom for Fempreneurs Facebook group. We're going to change the name to this group to the Life You Crave podcast group because that's really what we do in here. Every single week, Thursdays at 3 o'clock, I am recording the Life You Crave podcast that then gets published to the podcast a couple of weeks after I record it. But I love recording it in here. It's because, I've had this podcast for quite some time. We have like 150 some odd episodes now. And I stopped recording for a while. I really lost my momentum. I lost my love for it. And in fact, I never really had a ton of love for it. I love the result. I love the podcast that comes from it, but I hated recording it. And you know why? I figured out. It's because when you record a podcast, you're kind of just talking to yourself, right? Like, I know my podcast listeners are out there. I've met a lot of you now. Quite a few of you have become my clients, and I love you. But you can't actually see or interact with the people who are listening to your podcast. So I always felt like I was recording the podcast into some kind of silo, like I just felt like I was alone, and I'm a social being. I didn't love that. So I decided to start recording it live in my Facebook group where I have a community of super powerhouse, badass women who I know personally, a lot of you, but I can see you and you're here and we interact and we talk and we have discussions and conversations. It's like a real community. So when I'm recording the podcast live in here, I love it. I feel like I'm talking to you all. But when I record it alone on my recording software, it wasn't doing it for me. So I decided to go ahead and let this group just be what it is, which is really a container for the podcast and a place for my podcast listeners to come and discuss and talk about the things that they are learning and what I'm teaching on the podcast every week. And for those of you who aren't podcast listeners, but you love the group, you get both, right? You get the group and you get the recording. So I hope that if you are listening to the Life You Crave podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and you're on Facebook, that you come and hang out, at least join the group and say, hey, right? Like there's lots of benefits and perks to being in the group and getting the podcast here first every week and being able to interact with me live. But for some reason, the whole benefit of recording it live is that you can come in and ask me questions and interact with me live while I'm recording. Unfortunately, I cannot see if you are actually here with me live, but there's still a benefit to coming. I'm hoping they're going to fix it. I did send in a request to Facebook letting them know about the problem. But in the meantime, you can still comment, ask questions, because I go back in later and I check those comments and I make sure that I respond to you. You can even tag me so that I get notified. If you are a podcast listener, especially those of you who are longtime podcast listeners, I get people all the time telling me that my podcast has changed their lives. I actually know a woman who lost 40 pounds just from listening to the podcast. So if you're listening to the podcast and you really want to ask me some questions, or you just want to, know me, know my community, please come over to the Life You Crave Facebook group and join us. It's a wonderful, wonderful place to be. Okay, so today, you all, well, first of all, let me just, a quick introduction. I think most of you know me by now, but if you don't, I am Leah Pinelli. 7 years ago now, I learned how to finally stop overeating and live at my natural weight with minimal effort. This is what I call food freedom. I personally shed 30 pounds, but it was actually a byproduct of changing my habits, which is what we're talking about today. It was a byproduct. It wasn't necessarily intentionally trying to lose that weight, although I was very happy to lose that weight. But it was more of a byproduct of actually changing what I say is my relationship with food, and in particular, my habits with food. Your relationship actually forms your habits, which is what we're going to talk a little bit about today. And now, currently, my job in the world is to teach other women how to do the same thing. I have a program called the Fempire. And if you would like to learn more, if you'd like to learn how to stop overeating yourself so that you too can create the life you crave, head over to leahpinelli.com and click on Stop Overeating. So today's show is the first in my March series. The reason for this is because in the Fempire, every single month, we focus on a different kind of basic skill or a foundational skill or philosophy or a mindset or habit that the Fempire clients need to adopt in order to truly change their relationship with food and their habits with food so that they can sustain it in the long run. Behavioral change does not start with your behaviors. So in the Fempire, every month we have a different theme. For example, in December, we always do vision work. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why it's so important that you have a vision of your future self, of the possibility of what your life could be, of what your health could be, of what you could look like and feel like on a daily basis. It is so important to have a vision of that for yourself. In January, we do what's called Protocol 2.0, which is when we actually really look at, okay, what are we eat? What are our protocols around food? What are we eating on a daily basis? And is it serving us? Are we enjoying it? Do we get pleasure from our food? Is it giving us the result that we want? Are we keeping the promises that we make to ourselves around not just food, but also movement and wellness and self-care? So all of those pieces go into our January protocol focus. February, we focus on a very foundational concept, which I talked about in a previous podcast. Oh, shoot. And I can't remember the number now, but I will put it in the show notes. But it was literally just a couple of weeks ago about compassion and curiosity and courage as being the absolute foundational emotions that must lead the way through this journey. And then finally, now here we are in March, and it's all about habits. March is about habits and habit formation. And here's what I really want you to hear from me today. This training right now is not going to be your typical training. So you've likely heard a lot about habits and habit formation, and there are some really great books out there like Tiny Habits. One of my favorites is Atomic Habits by James Clear. These are great books. They are legit. However, they don't actually address the actual mindset that you really need to have in order to they address the behaviors. They don't necessarily start at the beginning, which is starting with how you're thinking about yourself, your self-image, your life, what it is that you most want and need and deserve, and then how those habits are informing who you're being in the world, right? So today I'm going to teach you a totally different approach to doing this. Now, I have recorded podcasts in the past on habit formation. Those are episodes 74 and 77. If you want to go back to the Life You Crave episodes 74 and 77, there is habit training there that would complement the March episodes this month on habits. But today, like I said, this is a totally different spin. Those two episodes, they are different. I'm teaching different content that I'm going to teach you here today. So I encourage you to listen to all of them and really use what you learn here to change your life. Straight up, change your life. Let's get into it. So I'm going to start by explaining to you all briefly. This is a brief overview of something that I go into depth teaching with in the Fempire. And so I want to just be perfectly transparent with you that you're not going to get everything, obviously, in this 30-minute episode that I'm teaching in the Fempire, because I'm going to teach you 3 concepts. I'm going to give you the high-level overview, but just know that this high-level overview is literally months of training in the Fempire. You can still learn the high-level overview, and you can get enough from understanding this high-level overview to actually implement what I'm going to teach you today. So don't think that it's a wash, okay? So here's the first thing that we start with in the Fempire. We always start with vision. And vision, as I mentioned before, is simply a picture in your mind of who it is that it's not even who you want to be in the future. It's actually who you are, right? When you don't feel at home in your body. So when we feel a sense of dissatisfaction, whether it's in our bodies or even if it's outside of our bodies, maybe it's in our careers, maybe it's in our relationships, maybe it's our financial situation. Whatever it is, when you feel this sense of kind of grinding or deep dissatisfaction that just won't let up, it won't go away, right? When you feel that, that is an indication that you are living out of alignment with your essential self, with who you truly are, right? So when I was 30 pounds heavier, for example, I was still me, but I was not quite as at home in the skin that I was in. I was a little off. I didn't feel right. I just mean in my own body. It didn't feel like me. And I didn't really know that until I had released those 30 pounds and realized, oh my gosh, this is what home feels like. This is what it feels like to really feel like your body matches who you are. It was huge for me. That is a real thing. And a lot of times, like I said, you don't even realize, like you're a fish in water. You don't realize that you're not at home until you arrive at home. So your future self is just the version of herself who is actually aligned with who she really truly is in her core. And when you are aligned with who you really truly are in your core, you create a life that is a reflection of who you really truly are in your core. You don't have misalignment anymore in your relationships, in your career, with your finances. It comes together. Now, that doesn't mean you don't still have problems. Like, you're still a human being, but that general sense of wholeness and integrity is there and it's present. And once you've touched it, once you've seen it, you can't unsee it, right? So it's powerful. So when you are visioning for yourself, when you're thinking about your future self, that is not an idealized version of you. It is you. Okay, it is you. Now, of course, I always say, like, if you're envisioning my future self, I used to always joke, like, up until recently, she was always like this, like, really tall, skinny brunette. But what I'm saying is that it's that sense of wholeness, that sense of integrity when you are in alignment. So that's the first thing is, and we spent an entire month in December in the Fempire really developing a vision for our future selves, who she is, and how she thinks, how she breathes, how she feels, what she does, who she is. Because you have to be familiar enough with that version of yourself, that essential self that you are. You have to be familiar enough with it, not only so that you can recognize it, but also so that you know the direction you're headed, right? You know what home feels like, so that when you are making decisions, you can move in the direction of that future self as opposed to getting lost and confused in a different direction. So that's the first thing, is you start with your vision. And then concept number 2 that we go deep into in the Fempire, but I can still give you this overview here. Concept number 2 is the concept of it's the process of transformation. And this is really simple. And actually, this is not something that I teach in a full month. This is actually woven through the entire 12-month program of the Fempire. And here's what this is. It is basically the concept or the idea of, how does transformation actually happen? Like, what are the steps for transformation, right? Because that's essentially what we're talking about. We're talking about changing your relationship with food, creating the life you crave. For a lot of my clients, it's finding food freedom so that they can reallocate all of that mental real estate to really living their purpose in life and showing up in life in a meaningful way, whether that's building a business or getting promoted or running for office, whatever that is, getting divorced. So when you think about any of these transformations, the truth of the matter is all transformation happens in 4, no matter what kind of transformation we're talking about. So whether it's career transformation, food transformation, whatever it is, it happens in 4 phases. Here are the 4 phases. Get a pen. You're going to want to write this down. The first phase of transformation is education, right? Like, you have to know. You have to know what you need to know in order to make the transformation. So for example, in the Fempire, we always start with education, right? So Why are you overeating in the first place? Like the actual scientific reasons why we overeat in the first place. So we learn about why people overeat, and actually we also learn from an educational standpoint how to stop overeating in theory, right? And that's what basically every diet is. But then it's theory, right? Like Weight Watchers is theory. Like, oh, if you only eat this many points, you're going to weigh this much, you're going to lose this much weight, right? In theory. But we can't stop at education. The next step after education, the next phase, is application. And application is where you're taking what you just learned and you're actually applying it in your life. Now, this takes quite a bit of energy. It takes energy to learn something new and then apply it to your life. But it's key. Like we all know, like you can learn a ton, but not actually do it or live it or be it. So you start to apply what you're learning. You go grocery shopping and maybe you buy some different foods, or maybe you eat in a different way, or you're applying these learnings to your life. That's application. I will tell you that most people stop there. And most people stop there for a variety of reasons. But when it comes to food, we stop there because usually it's a heavy lift. The application part, it takes a lot of energy, like I said. And a mistake that people make is they try to do it alone. And that is a huge mistake. When you are trying to undo decades of patterning, and this is the truth with food, when you are trying to undo those types of habits and patterns, and you're trying to do it alone, we are hardwired to make change in community. And we do better when we make change in community because it's hard and you need to lean on people. We don't have that much energy to do it by ourselves. So getting into a community of support is really key. But the two reasons that I see that people quit is because it's too exhausting to keep at it and they don't have enough support to get through the application phase. So usually people learn, they start to apply, and then they taper off, right? So tell me in the comments if this is you, whether it's your exercise routine or how you're eating or even what you're doing for your business, how you are showing up on social media, whatever the things are that you know you should be doing, but you lose steam. That is the reason why. It is too much energy and you are doing it alone most of the time. Then the third phase of transformation is integration. And integration is very similar to application, but the difference is that integration is where it starts to become automatic, right? It's like, this is just what I do, right? So going back to that example of like, now you just, here's an example for me. One of the habits that is totally integrated into my life is I always have certain things in my fridge, right? I always have carrots, bell peppers, avocado. Who knows what's going to happen to the price of avocados right now, but carrots, and usually avocado are not in the fridge, by the way. I like to have cherry tomatoes around. Yeah, I skip them during the winter, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like I have this staple group of veggies that are all veggies that I can eat raw. And did I say bell peppers yet? Cucumbers, I love those. When I first started to apply what I was learning, I would run out of that stuff. I just started to become integrated where every time I went to the grocery store, I just made sure got to grab those things, right? Started putting it on the list when I would run out. Just making sure that I always had those things. Because if I always have those things, I always have something to eat. I always have cheese, by the way. I always have yogurt. I always have, certain staples are always around. That's integration, where you start to say, okay, I don't have to think so much about this. This is kind of like becoming more automatic. I've integrated it into my life in a way. I don't have to make a special trip to the store. I get this stuff when I go to the store anyway, whatever it is. Or if it's a workout routine, like you've integrated it. You're not trying to figure out where you're going to squeeze a workout in the week. You're just, it's integrated. It happens every week, same time, same place, blah, blah, blah. The last phase is the phase that most people never get to. And it's the money phase, right? It's where you need to go if you really want to have sustainable change. Integration is great, and you can actually stay in integration. But if you want freedom, if you want ease, you want elegance, if you want to be somebody different with food or with whatever transformation you're aspiring to go through, if you really want to do it in a way that it's who you've become, you have to get to the fourth phase, which is embodiment. And embodiment is where the true peace lies, because now you don't think about it at all. It is completely automatic, and it's not something that you're using any mental energy to do. And so when you think about, there's lots of things that we have embodied in our lives, right? An example that I use is brushing my teeth. It's a habit that I do not spend any mental, I don't even debate like, oh, should I brush now or later? No, I literally have the same routine, right? I get up, I go pee, I brush my teeth. It is just, it's non-negotiable. It's what I do. I don't think about it. Here's the benefit of embodiment. The reason embodiment is freedom is because when you have automated these things, when you have put these things on autopilot and you no longer have to think about them, what happens then is then you have all of this extra mental real estate that you used to have to use to think about what am I going to eat and how am I going to lose weight and when I'm going to, all of that, it's freed up because your workout is automated. Your eating routines are automated. Your teeth brushing is automated. You don't think about it. And that is truly how I built my business. I literally freed up that mental real estate. I have the time and energy and freedom to build a business, which is how I did it. So you have to understand those 4 phases of transformation, because when you understand that, you can see where you're getting stuck. You can see where it's not working. And then you can get help within those phases. So that's number 2. The last concept that I teach in the Fempire that's crucial to understanding how to really, really, really change your habits in a way that's going to stick is the concept that your behaviors, what you're doing with food or with exercise or what you're not doing, sometimes the habit is something you're not doing that you want to start doing. Your behaviors are not the problem. Your behaviors are not the focus. This is what so many people do, right? Is we focus on the behaviors when really, when you understand that your behaviors are 100% driven by your feelings. So any action that you take is inspired from a feeling. Maybe you show up to work because you're anxious about not having enough money for retirement, right? Maybe you eat the chocolate because you're bored or tired, whatever it is. But the idea is that we take action because we're having a feeling. And our feelings are always driven by our thoughts. So what you think determines what you feel. And what you feel is going to drive your behaviors. So when it comes to behavior change, you have to start with your thinking. There is no reason to start anywhere else, right? Because it's kind of like you're starting in the middle and you're not addressing the root cause, right? Which I've talked about quite a bit on this podcast. So those are the 3 big concepts that I review with the Fempire before we dive into behavioral change. And once we have those, which that's your high level overview, you can go much deeper and really start to leverage those concepts to make this behavioral change. But for our purposes on the podcast today, I want to share with you how to really start to use these concepts to change your behaviors in the long run. But before I do, I'm going to give you a little assignment for the week. And before I do, I just want to also help to frame how I'm inviting you to think about this habit change process a little differently than how you're thinking about it right now. Most of the time, when we have identified habits that we want to change, right? Whether it's a habit that I'm not exercising and I should be exercising. I'm not weightlifting, I should be weightlifting. I'm eating too much sugar. I'm not eating enough protein, like whatever it is that we would like to start doing or stop doing. We tend to we approach it with like a deficit model. And what I mean by that is we approach it from this place of, I am somehow broken. There's a problem with me. I am not doing something right. I should be eating more protein. I should be lifting more weights. And so when we come at it that way, if you really think about that, you're coming at it from a deficit model, and a deficit model says that there's a hole that needs to be filled. There's something wrong that needs to be righted, right? Instead, I want to invite you to think about this not as a deficit model, but rather coming from a place of, I am completely okay exactly how I am. Now, I know some of you, alarm bells just went off because you're like, I'm not okay. I am pre-diabetic or diabetic. I need to lose 50 pounds. Like, what are you talking about? I am not okay. But just humor me for a minute. If you take this approach as, okay, I'm actually whole and good and okay, and I don't need to be fixed. I am not broken, but I could totally level up, right? Having this aspiration to elevate the quality of your life is so much more inspiring, at least to me. It is so much more inspiring than thinking I have to fix this problem. I have to go eat more protein, right? Like that's like such a Debbie Downer, you know? Instead, it's like, how can I elevate the quality of my life? And maybe the way you elevate the quality of your life is by feeling stronger in your body. And so then you ask yourself, okay, well then what are the habits that a woman who's really strong in her body, what are her habits? But you can't start with, oh, I'm just going to go implement her habits. Because the thing is you're not her. You don't think like she does. You don't feel like she does. You have to start there. But I invite you to think about this habit change as being an opportunity. Every day, every choice that you make is an opportunity to elevate the quality of your life as opposed to fill some deficit that's a problem. I hope that makes sense. I would love to hear your thoughts on that. All right, I'm going to get into the actual habit change piece now. I do recognize that we're a little bit more than 30 minutes in, but we're almost to the end here. All right, so what I would love for you to do is I would love for you to take that mindset that I just shared with you. And we're going to start this months-long habit journey with an audit. Now, I literally did this with the Fempire on Tuesday of this week. I know it doesn't sound too sexy to be doing an habit audit, especially when I just talked about elevating the quality of your life. But it's really important that you really do have a clear sense of where you are now. What are your current actual habits, not the habits you think you have, but what are your current actual habits that you have? And then once you have like a baseline for where you're at, then we can start to look at how you might want to up level. Okay. So I'm going to give you a little example of this. I want you to go through 24 hours at some point this week between now and next Thursday when I record part 2 of this podcast here in the Life You Crave Facebook group. Just start to notice your habits that you do. And a lot of them might even be subconscious because they're on autopilot for a 24-hour period. So for example, mine might look like every morning I wake up and generally the first thing I do is I actually check in with how I feel physically. Did I have any alcohol last night? Am I feeling the result of that? You know, just kind of checking in. Am I feeling energetic? How am I feeling physically? Then, like I mentioned earlier, I literally every morning, like clockwork, I get out of bed, I go pee, and I brush my teeth. While I'm brushing my teeth, I open the curtains in my entire house. After that, I gulp a bunch of water, I take a bunch of vitamins, and then I pour my Earl Grey tea, and I sit and enjoy that tea. Usually, my favorite way to spend my morning is, and most mornings, I sit and I drink my tea with my journal and or a book. But I also have a 10-year-old. So some mornings, a lot of mornings, my husband's able to get him off to school. But some mornings, I sit with him at the table while he has his breakfast, kind of depending on what time I woke up. So that is what I do every single morning. And then I transition to exercise. So what are my habits around that, right? And then from exercise, what is my transition to work? And then noticing what are my habits around work? So when things are stressful, what is my habit? You know, a habit that I used to have at work when things were stressful or tedious or tiresome, and I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, is I had an automatic habit of getting chocolate at 2 p.m. every day, usually chocolate covered almonds but it would be whatever chocolates I could get my hands on, a cup of coffee, and popcorn was my thing. So that was a habit that I had formed, right, over time. So just noticing what are my habits. Another habit of mine is eating really fast, eating at my desk, eating in front of the computer. So just noticing your habits. Dinner habits, bedtime habits and evening habits, just getting a sense of what is it that you're doing on a very regular basis that might be on autopilot and might not. The purpose for this that we're going to do is next week I'm going to give you a little exercise to do with this 24-hour habit audit. But what I kind of want to give you a sense of where we're going with this is you're going to look at your habits and really think about that vision of yourself, that future self of yours. And you're just going to kind of start to assess how many of these habits are aligned with her and how she lives her life, and how many of these habits are out of alignment. I'll give you an example of this. And this is, by the way, without judgment. This isn't like, oh my God, I'm so bad, I'm never going to achieve my essential self, my future self. No, it's none of that. This is like, okay, we're doing a pre-assessment because remember the phases of transformation. This is kind of the education piece, right? You're assessing where you're at so that you can start to apply some of the tools that I'll teach you to make the transformation. I'll give you an example of how your vision plays into this. I have a beautiful client who, when she came to me, she was doing a particular diet. It's one of those diets that there's lots of prepackaged foods and prepared foods that you buy through the diet company. And she said to me, she's like, well, this is working. She'd hired me, but she was still eating those foods and doing that diet while she worked with me. And she said, well, these foods are working for me. Like I'm losing the weight, or I've lost weight eating this way. And I said to her, does your future self eat this way? And she thought for just a second and then very definitively was like, no, right? And that is so important. She stopped eating those foods and she enjoys her food a hell of a lot more now, right? But she's not eating these crappy bars or whatever. But the point is that when you really align yourself with who you most desire to be, you are aligning yourself with who you actually are. And then when you get into alignment and start making decisions now from this place that are aligned with who you want to be, like you don't get to who you want to be by being somebody different, right? Like you're not going to be some happy-go-lucky, positive, super strong, super fit 70-year-old if you're not a happy-go-lucky, super strong, super fit 45, 50-year-old. Right? Do you see how that works? So the point is, if you're sitting on the couch right now and you're like complaining every day, you're probably not going to be that lady at 70. So that's the idea, is it's really about becoming not just who you want to be, but who you really are right now. So this audit is going to help you see, right? Without shame, without guilt. Go back and listen to the February podcast, February 2025. I recorded just before this, on compassion, curiosity, and courage. It will help you with this step, but I encourage you to do that. And then next week, I'm going to give you a little activity to do with this audit, and then I'm going to help you to start to get the ball rolling on actual habit change and behavioral change. So that's what I have for you all today. If you are not subscribed to the Life You Crave podcast, please do subscribe. Send this episode to a friend, somebody who needs to hear it. Head over to leahpinelli.com and click on Stop Overeating if you're ready to actually speed this process up. Stop just listening to the podcast, but you're ready to actually on board, join Fempire, and stop overeating, create the life you crave like yesterday.
You've been listening to The Life You Crave. I lost 30 pounds years ago without dieting, willpower, or deprivation. I'm on a mission to help other women, including you, do the same. You can book a free weight loss strategy session with me over at leahpinelli.com. That's LIAPINELLI.com. See you on our next call or on the next episode. And remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment on iTunes.